Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our second volume of Gender Equality in the Tech Industry. By bridging with our previous event, we would like to introduce today's theme, Solutioning Forward for Systemic Change. In August of 2020, we held our first volume, which raised many interesting points regarding issues and obstacles that individual women and men face in different phases of their professional journey. From the search for mentors in the tech industry, job applications, lack of encouragement to women applying for their dream positions, and the many gaps in the recruitment system, we learned about the need for greater awareness of gendered biases and the ongoing influence of stereotypical views of femininity and masculinity. This plays a big role in our daily decision making, not only on an individual level, but also on a systemic level. And this requires systemic transformation. That is why we are here today with a wonderful moderated panel, bringing you a very provocative discussion on the best possible ways to facilitate long needed transformations. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Rachel to introduce our guests today.
Thank you, Jan. Before we begin, I would just like to briefly go over some virtual housekeeping as well as our agenda for today to ensure that the event runs as smoothly as possible. It is my pleasure. Okay, and so as you can all see, we are all joined today via a global restream, and you are watching this webinar as it is streamed across various platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We ask that you please do not record this event. There will be an official recording by the host for internal purposes. And if you do have any questions that you would like to address to the panel, please type them into the chat with whatever platform you're using, and we will try our best to answer them during the Q&A. So after a short introduction, we will move quickly towards our panel discussion, where we have our esteemed panel and our moderator, and this will last for approximately an hour, until which we will do our panel question and answer session. And then we'll close with some final remarks, as well as some ideas and initiatives and future events on how to get more involved in the future. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce the co-hosts who have been diligently working together in preparation for this event over the past few months. So first we have enjoi Diversity and Innovation, whose mission is to help leaders and managers to appreciate how diversity rocks innovation. Using law and policy expertise, enjoi guides organizations in building a workplace ecosystem that's diversity positive and where the mindset is committed to DEI as a holistic business strategy that rewards inclusive leadership practices in corporate culture. Next, Women Who Code Tokyo is one of the largest and most active communities of engineers dedicated to inspiring women to excel in technology careers. Women Who Code envision a world where women are representative as technical executives, founders, VCs, board members, and software engineers, and more. Next, I'm honored as a member myself to introduce Women Powered International, a membership association of diverse young women committed to promoting gender equality in Japan. WeInt envisions a society where all women can exert their personal capacity, demonstrate leadership, and have a positive impact in the world. Last but not least, We Speak Equality believes that despite being such an integral topic, gender equality has increasingly become a stigmatized conversation rather than a chance for intersectional understanding. Therefore, We Speak aims to dispel misconceptions and create a more honest, open discussion about equality issues. I'd also love to introduce the wonderful speakers who will form our panel tonight. So they are as follows. Hirona Hono is the manager of the People Development Team with a focus area in L&D, D&I, and onboarding at Mercari, a Japanese startup that develops marketplace apps with academic expertise in intercultural studies as well. Next, Dr. Jackie F. Steele is an author, speaker, and professor of political science in both Japan and Canada. And as CEO of enjoi Diversity and Innovation, she is contributing her diversity and policy making expertise to support global companies in building innovative and diversity positive culture into the heart of their sustainable business strategies. Next, we have Jason Wong, who is formerly an engineer lead at Etsy with over 2 decades of experience in various sectors, and he now works with executive teams and engineering leaders to improve management practices and establish inclusive cultures. He also adds that he's a donut enthusiast. Dr. Sarah Saska, last but not least, is the co-founder and CEO of Feminuity, a global strategy firm that partners with leading technology startups through Fortune 500 companies to build diverse teams, equitable systems, and inclusive products and company cultures. Finally, I would also like to introduce our moderator, Milan Nguyen, who is the founder of We Speak Equality, as well as a product specialist at Google. Her expertise and insights will be very well served as a moderator for the panel discussion tonight. Please let's give a warm welcome, virtual welcome to Milan. And I pass the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Jan and Rachel, for the welcome and introduction to today's event. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel discussion, and I really can't wait to hear our panelists' insights towards systemic solutions to gender equality in tech. Before we deep dive into this topic, though, let's start with a little warm-up, just to get to know our panelists a bit better. So first question to our panelists, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became engaged with work on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Hirona, would you like to start maybe?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Hirona. I am a manager of people development team at Mercari. We are a Japanese startup that develops a marketplace app. And I'm leading a team that is dedicated to onboarding and DNA initiatives and learning and development programs. I was born and raised in Japan, studied and worked in several countries, including the UK and the US. And my professional background is intercultural training. So really trying to develop rapport to help people understand each other across cultures and help them work together over like cross-cultural differences. And I started working at Mercari almost 3 years ago and started DNA initiatives. And now it's became an official initiative across the company. And my vision is to create a safe and comfortable space for everybody so that they can bring their true self to workplace and also to home. Thank you. Milan, you are muted, I think.
Sorry again. Thank you so much, Hirona, for that. Super interesting. Very looking forward to your insights. Jackie, would you like to maybe move on with your introduction and how you became engaged with work on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. And it's really a pleasure to have everyone on the panel tonight. I guess for me, I've been sort of active as a feminist political scientist, looking at democracies. How do we build out diversity into the core of our citizenship narratives and myths about how we talk about our country, and for me, looking particularly at Japan and Canada, among other countries. And then how do we build that out in public policy and our political institutions, our political parties, and all the way through to the way we think about how we use law to build an inclusive society. And I recently, in the last 2 years, wanted to start bringing sort of public policy frameworks in Canada that we use around intersectional analysis and intersectionality to sort of enrich the conversation in the D&I space in Japan, where I've been living for about 20 years. And so much of my work in Japan has been sort of in the academia doing feminist research topics, bringing diversity lens to topics within Japanese citizenship and Japanese public policy, but also now really interested and committed to working with companies to bring an intersectional diversity lens to the D&I space. And so the last 2 years has been really interesting. I have 2 children. So they are a mixed race descent, as we would, I guess, describe it that way in Japan. In Canada, they probably wouldn't be described that way, but certainly dealing on a daily basis as a mother, trying to make sure that both my daughter and my son don't experience bullying because of their racial differences, because they're non-national foreigners. It's the way they're described. That's also a really part of, I guess, sort of my identity as a feminist mother.
Thank you, Jackie. So that's really interesting that you already have kind of a very different background to Hirona. So very interested to hear your views as well. Jason, what about you? What's your background and your work on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, thanks, Milan. So I'm a leadership coach and sort of fractional VP of engineering, which is just a fancy way of saying consultant these days. And my introduction to diversity, equity, and inclusion was actually began at my time at Etsy. So it's been about, I guess, about 8 years now. Back when I started at the company, it was about 100 folks, and our engineering organization was about 90% men at the time. Our user base was about 90% women. Pretty much the rest of the company was also about 90% women. So it got really awkward in our engineering organization. And it was a funny story because shortly after I joined, we committed to gender diversity at our company. And about a year later, we went from 90% men to 95% men after that commitment. And it was like, wait a minute, what happened? And it turns out, as they say, like a goal without a plan is just a wish. And we just like said it, but if you walked into our organization, there was no tangible evidence that we actually cared about this thing. And so after that, we followed what I would call a diversity first approach. And we focused really hard on the hiring numbers, which we got a lot of success with. We went from 5% women to about 15% women. We pat ourselves on the back, mission accomplished, great job. And sort of took our eye off that ball. And as a couple years went by and our numbers started decreasing again. And that's when really I started taking a hard look at what was happening. And it turns out that people were having terrible experiences in our engineering organization. They were being told they didn't belong. They were being not only like in one-on-ones of like, you're never going to be a good engineer here, but also in the rates of promotion, in the pay equity, in how who got to speak, who didn't get to speak, who got recognized, who didn't get recognized. And so that really started my education into like, if we're really going to solve this, like I need to get better at this and understand sort of what the factors were at play. And over the course of time, my team went from all men to about 35% women and non-binary. My managers and I dumped, 6 figures worth of salary into pay equity over time. We looked at promotion rates. We just up and down the chain figured out sort of how to create better outcomes. And I think the driving factor for me was I'm 41 years old. My job didn't exist when I was born, right? And I was just incredibly lucky that I walked into this industry where I had a passion for it. I loved what I did. And at a time when it pays extraordinarily well, right? And the idea that not everyone could participate in the riches of the tech industry just really stuck in my craw in a way that I've been determined to make better for the future. So that's sort of where I'm at.
Thank you, Jason. Wow, so it sounds like you have quite an adventure also in the past and quite some very interesting experiences, and I'm very looking forward to your systemic solutions as well. So the numbers that kind of stuck with me were when you said that 95% of the Eng org in Etsy were men and 90% of the customers were women. So that must have been like this is like huge in my opinion. So very looking forward to hearing your views as well. Okay, and then we have Sarah. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and also how you became engaged with work on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi all. My name is Dr. Sarah Saska. My pronouns are she and her. So I often joke that I'm an academic, sort of recovering academic turned entrepreneur. I spent many years in the academic setting, studying everything from sort of violence against trans communities through to sort of other forms of gender-based violence and beyond. But during my PhD, I ended up spending a lot of time looking at a range of different sectors and industries, identifying different types of bias that were just, revealing themselves in these weird and wild ways. One of the studies that I worked on related to the automotive industry, and the deep-seated bias that's still very much present in the design of seatbelts, and how, when people who are pregnant get into a car crash, they're disproportionately impacted by a car crash, largely because the automotive industry still uses a standard practice to use male-bodied crash test dummies as the norm or the default for much of their testing. And so I sort of took that frame and looked in the field of AI and machine learning and facial recognition and some other spaces. And it just became really obvious that there was a really significant need to bring diversity, equity, inclusion related lenses to the field of, innovation and technology more broadly. So I translated the research that I was doing in the academic context into practice. I joined an accelerator program in Toronto, Canada, and launched an organization that I've now been leading for just under 6 years. We'll be 6 years next month. So we're very much, I think, motivated and led by the idea that, in real time in this world, AI and data-driven informed approaches are shaping our lives now and well into the future. And, a very sort of small portion of the world is actually participating in that design. And we think we're at a very critical inflection point where we can either make things better, right, through the use of technology and innovation, or we can make things a whole heck of a lot worse. And we want to be on the good side of history.
Thank you so much to all of you for this great introduction and to telling us all about a bit about yourself. I think it's super interesting that we have such a diverse group. You all have something in common. You want to make a positive change, and at the same time you're very diverse and different. We have academics turned entrepreneurs, we have academics, we have someone who worked as a startup, we have someone from Etsy. So I'm very, very looking forward to hearing your views. Let's start off with the next question. Could you tell us a bit about the kinds of challenges that you see in the tech sector, and offer a concrete example of systemic inequality that you face either personally or affecting your organization? Jason, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think the way that I see it, right, the tech landscape as we know it today was written by and for white men, right? I mean, it's kind of like hard to ignore that fact, right? I mean, if we just take social media, for example, which is like very prominent right now, how effective it is at spreading far right ideology and disinformation, like how blind the leaders of those companies were to the effects of what they were doing. I mean, we know how to combat hate speech, right? There's decades of research on this, and we just didn't do it, right? And what we saw was, recently with the ex-president's accounts being banned, like a 73% reduction in misinformation. Like, this was a foregone conclusion, right? And we knew a lot of folks, knew that this was the solution, and we just failed to act, right? And part of it, I think, really is like we just refuse. I mean, we nearly lost our democracy because we refused to believe that white people could be bad, right? That they would mount an insurrection, which is just mind-boggling. So, like. That to me is a concrete example, right? And we see the media narratives around, how these, progressive, quote unquote, progressive leaders are censoring far right content. When you look at the daily links that are the most clicked on any of these platforms, it is by far the disinformation links. So that's one thing. I think the other challenge that I find in my day-to-day is just this lack of understanding of how deep the problem goes, right? I mean, folks really do think they can solve their gender equity problems or their racial equity problems in a quarter or a year. They're like, we can solve this by the end of this year. And like, it's just like, we have to just rewind a bit and just like, this is decades and centuries of oppression, and it's going to take the rest of the life of your company, right? So there's still a lot of education and awareness that needs to happen. When I speak with clients, sometimes they ask, what are the innovative things that you're doing? Like, this being the tech industry, like, what are the innovative things that you're doing? And it's like, this is not about innovation. This is not about, like, we need to go look back on the decades of research. People know how to do this, and we just have to apply that to our current context. So that's sort of my world. Oops, Milan, you're muted.
Did it again. I'm so sorry for that. Thank you so much for that, Jason. Sarah, what about you? Can you tell us a bit about the challenges that you see in the tech sector and an example of systemic inequality?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said just a few minutes ago, we're really concerned with the way that we're letting AI and data-driven approaches and data-informed approaches shape our lives now and into the future, right? Technologies and innovations are making decisions about our lives. And we're doing this often under the guise that people are busy, people are biased, right? So therefore we need, some sort of efficient and less biased solution to do things for us. And one of the things that we were talking about a lot and have been thinking about a lot for many years is this idea that technology and innovation is somehow objective or neutral, right? We just sort of like defer decisions to all these different tools because we don't trust ourselves, and we forget about the fact that humans are very much at the creation point of these tools. So when we think about something like an Uber or Lyft ride that we take home on a Friday night, something that's seemingly sort of mundane, is still complicit in algorithmic oppression, right? There's research that's shown that dynamic pricing systems of rideshare services calculate fares for trips to, say, predominantly Black or low-income communities higher than trips to other locations, right? But like that's just one really sort of seemingly small example. We're really concerned with how algorithms are determining, especially in the context of the workplace, right? Who gets hired, who sees a job ad in the first place, who gets promoted, who gets fired, who gets loans or insurance, or as Jason said, right, which political advertisements that folks are engaging with are seeing. Or how judges are using different types of technology, again, under the guise that technology is somehow more objective than humans. Judges using different types of platforms to determine who to send to prison or who to parole or even who to put to death, right? And these are really fundamental and heavy things that we're deferring to, different forms of tech and innovation, and that's really worrisome. And especially since we know that, tech and innovation generally, right, is wildly scalable. So we can reproduce existing inequities at scale and at warp speed. And that's what we are really sort of paying a lot of attention to.
Thank you. So it sounds really like even if we don't know it, seems like systemic inequality might be everywhere, or in so many different places that we aren't even aware of, such as you said, it's the Lyft or Uber app. It's when you have apply for a loan or even in the educational system. And this is where we need to look out for, basically.
And in the midst of COVID, right, we're putting more sort of trust and faith and deferring more of our decisions into so many of these different types of tools and platforms. So I feel like it's just exponentially so in real time.
Yeah, thank you for that. Hirona, what about you? Can you tell us a bit about your experience with systemic inequality?
Yeah, I can share my experience as a person working in a tech company. So we say that we are like startup, but we are about so we have 1,800 people. So I think we passed this startup phase and now really turning into middle-sized company. And what I experienced as a D&I lead, I was a D&I lead for the last 2.5 years now as a manager, but the really systemic inequality perpetuate itself in many different forms, and it's so embedded in many different parts of our daily life. So I'd like to explain 3 different parts of it. So the first, inequality in system. So for example, automated resume screening, who gets rejected even before the screening process starts. Does this person have a computer science degree? How old is this person? Or did they graduate from prestigious school? Or by age, by gender? There are so many algorithm already out there that we don't even know that we're actually using it. So first, that is inequality in system. And then when inequality systems perpetuate itself, it comes to the form of inequality in our own action. For example, if I don't see people who don't have computer science degree, and if that becomes norm, I just don't think of anybody who doesn't have a CS degree as a potential candidate through my friend's referral. So what we learn unconsciously through the system is now part of our brain. So we don't even think that we do have a biased system. And or in a more like daily example, for example, if you're invited to a new meeting, new project meeting or kickoff, you unconsciously try to find male leadership figures, and maybe there's a woman and that person is a leading the project, but my mind is already programmed that like who is a leader is this man in this like 40 looking person. So like that's really like degrading ourselves and like putting filters to our own mind. And that kind of leads to the next part. Number 3 is internalization of our systemic inequality. So for example, like when you see somebody in trouble, maybe you would say, you know, she's emotional. You know, like this could be a form of internal sexism, internalized racism, or internalized ageism. So like from the system to our own action, and that kind of perpetuate itself to the form that we don't even realize that it exists in our mind. Other example is like self-degrading expression. Let's say I'm a male in a senior leadership positions in my 50s, and then say, this executive board is totally like middle-aged man's club. Like just saying that doesn't mean anything to me, maybe as a man in 50s, but like what kind of negative impact does my comment have to other people? Like it's degrading to other people in the same group, it's degrading your own value and the other people on the other side of the room. So that I think that's how the systemic inequality perpetuates itself in a system and in your own action, and then we project ourselves into that inequality and just like pass it to others. And I think that's like what we see on a daily basis in a tech industry.
Yes, that totally makes sense, and thanks for sharing this really structured overview of your experiences when it comes to systemic inequalities. Jackie, I'm sure you also have some experience back from your time also as an academic, but also from the enjoi D&I consultancy.
Sure, and I think in some ways there's an interesting overlap, and I guess I'll draw more on my experiences in academia to sort of bring that critique forward to what I think is also quite prevalent and will echo a lot of, I think, what Sarah's even mentioning too. I mean, we don't, even in, law and political science, which is where I spent most of my time in academia, within the Japanese National University system, I'll just speak maybe from that experience, there's really hasn't been enough engagement with critical research methods, critical ethics questions in terms of also doing research within law and political science that is thinking from the insights of feminist philosophy, looking at critical race studies, looking at queer theory. At least within the Japanese university system where I have been for the last 15 years, I'm not seeing engagement with those critical theories. And if we're not engaging with those critical theories about democracy and citizenship, and we're not taking seriously critical research methods, then the baseline research question that you then start to study itself has all of these blind spots. It has all of these assumptions, gendered assumptions, heteronormative assumptions, racial assumptions, ethno-national narratives that get built into the research question. And so if that's the case in these elite spaces of law and political science, and maybe also within computer science and engineering as well. I mean, on the natural science side, we often don't have engagement with social science, critical research methods also because it's natural science. And there's this superficial divide between natural science and social science, but within the whole, I think there's not enough investment in critical research methods and critical perspectives within that to challenge what are we even assuming is the get-go first research question worth researching, and what is it perpetuating in terms of systemic bias, and then how does that get transported onto the technological solutions and the researches we're doing for universal design, be it, there's a whole bunch of different ways in which, if we're not ensuring that, tech companies and engineers and people doing computer science and natural science are also engaging with political philosophy and understanding how inequalities of power relations play out through political systems, through institutions, through law. And then how does that get perpetuated as the backdrop ecosystem of democracy within which all companies are organizing and working? And I guess that's the one sort of spot where I think we do see, as a result of that, increasing willingness to just say, big data, as Sarah says, big data is neutral. Qualitative data is too interpretive, but quantitative big data is somehow neutral. And it doesn't have value judgments or these assumptions around gender and queer identity or race or who is the normal citizen around whom the whole technological solution or the user is meant to be serving. And I think unless we decenter that understanding of who is the normal person in the middle who we're designing for, we need to complicate that. We need to diversify the models of excellence or the models of normalcy that are at the core research question driving around whom we're building innovations for technology, for research methods, for the questions we're asking, and even just thinking about which questions are worth asking. What constitutes a genuine evidence-based solution, be it in public policy, in technology, or in science? And to do that, we need severe critical thinking skills and critical theory and critical research methods and ethics that are coming back into the core of driving how we're even thinking about these questions.
Okay, so it sounds like we definitely have a long way to go. We've heard of some different challenges in the tech industry when it comes to gender equality, of the general lack of education and awareness. Jason, for instance, mentioned the topic of misinformation that got spread, and it took so long to actually stop it. We heard about ubiquitous kind of challenges when it comes to systemic inequality, since all kind of big data is assumed to be neutral, but it's not, and we see inequality in every aspect of our lives, such as using the Uber app, in resume screening, as Hirona also said, but also in academic life, the need for usage of more feminist research methodologies. Looking at all of these challenges, what do you think we can do? And looking at your experience in particular, how did you approach diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization? Can you maybe talk about an initiative that you led that has been successful? Sarah, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we're a consulting firm, right? So we're working with organizations externally, and those are where a lot of our practices are sort of being iterated and designed in real time. And from our perspective at a high level, to Jackie's point, to everyone's point, right? One of the things that we think is sort of wildly critical to how we approach any initiative is for it to be data informed, because not only is this industry sort of taking shape in real time and needing to gain credibility and all of those good things, we need to be able to measure things over the long term. So when we do assessments with organizations, our optimal flow is to build a really robust DEI survey and to pair it with up to 34 dimensions of demographics, which is way more than what we're seeing sort of on the average survey out there. And then, of course, we pair that with qualitative, right? To Jackie's point, like, quantitative data is great, and we still seem to undermine qualitative in a lot of spaces. But for us, it's the qualitative data that breathes the sort of the stories and the life into the quantitative, and we need both. And we take that data and we use an intersectional analysis to how we sort of break that down, right? So instead of being able to tell an organization that, hey, 40% of women within your organization feel like X, we'd much rather be able to tell you that 10% of women who are also queer and also raising tiny humans and providing caregiving for aging parents feel like this, right? The more granular that we can get while still protecting people's experiences and identities, it lets us do our jobs better. So, I mean, fundamentally, like, that's sort of how we approach sort of, I think, the data collection process with our clients. And as a small team ourselves, we like to dog food our practices. So before, about a year before the start, I guess the official start, the WHO name start of COVID-19 as a pandemic, we had been doing a ton of research on remote practices and what does it look like to scale a remote team in as an equitable and an inclusive manner, right? So we had been researching and sort of piloting little parts of that for about a year prior to the official naming of the pandemic. And then we really just got to put it all into practice in real time. And we then, had a sense of what was working, what was not, at least for us. And we were able to share a lot of those different practices with our clients, right? Or to adapt them for our clients. And that's been pretty cool because while I think there's a lot of great leading practices in this space, the playbook is still very much being written. So we're really iterative and we just kind of keep playing and designing and trying things on ourselves.
Thank you. What kind of reminds me of that, what I really appreciate is that you said that you would dog food everything and that you have a very granular approach when it comes to surveys. It always reminds me of people saying, we've always done it this way. And I can imagine that when people keep on saying that, they might have a lot of, issues with actually tackling a new approach, such as being more granular in their surveys or stop not dog fooding their practices instead of just doing it all the way like they've done it before. And it's good to hear that it seems to be very successful. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I ask a question? Can I ask you to explain where that expression comes from, the dog fooding? I think it's a really interesting expression. Where does that come from? Do we know, or could you give more details on what you mean by it when you use it in that way?
Yeah, so I don't know the etymology. It is one of those things that I have been meaning to look up because it does sound a little funny. It's just the idea that you're going to, eat your own food, right? Like before you sort of share something out with others and have them try it on, you try it on, you taste it yourself. It's a common practice in the product inclusion space. So for example, Google, right? Like they dog food a lot of their practices right before they sort of scale them more broadly.
They try them out internally, they pilot them.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for asking that question though, Jackie, because I can imagine that especially in the tech industry maybe, or in any other industry, you always have your own lingo. So if you, like everyone else, don't know something or are wondering about the term, let us know, because if you don't know, probably our audience might also not know. Okay. So moving on, Yorona, would you maybe tell us also a bit about your practices or any other approach that was also very meaningful to approach inequality?
Sure. So at Mercari, the company I'm working for, we started our D&I initiative like 2.5 years ago. And that time, there was no like solid D&I initiatives or activities in the company. And then it was already like, there were already like more than 1,000 people in the company and with very mixed like racial, ethnic, and language groups. So I just saw the huge need that if we want to like grow at the current speed, like, we really have to have this solid D&I strategy that help company growth in a very inclusive manner. So I like to share like 2 stories. Like one is how our perception around D&I has changed, and the other part is the real example of what kind of D&I initiative we actually introduced. So the way it started was the club activity. So we have so many different clubs in the company, and one of the club activity was like a diversity club where people just come and share like a good web articles or like invite people to like events or study session, but it was like a really informal stage. And then we developed that club activity to cross-organization or cross-division projects where we ran like D&I survey and did a lot of inquiry to understand the real needs of employees. And then like half a year later, we finally got approval from executives to launch a D&I team officially. So in the last 2.5 years, we worked really hard to first launch many grassroots activity around D&I, like running D&I sessions, like doing inquiries, and also like bringing external like speakers to the company so that we raise this awareness in a grassroots level. And on the other side, we were also like advocating ourselves to execs and to convince them that, hey, we need a shared vocabulary to talk about D&I. Like, what does D&I mean to us? Like, what diversity or diverse workplace looks for our context, for our company, and for our company's future. So that took a long process to really bring many people's idea to make it like a D&I statement that we actually ended up publishing externally. And now, like, I think we came to the the second phase of D&I initiatives, where we really talk about D&I in a global company strategy level. So it's not like D&I is like casual activity that only passionate people are involved, but it's more about D&I being a company strategy for growth and business development and people and talent development. So like that's how we evolved our D&I initiatives for the last 2.5 years. And one example I would like to share with you today is about like educational training program we launched last year, which is called Build at Mercari. It's spelled BUILD at Mark Mercari. It's an educational training program for future software engineers who identify with underrepresented or minority groups. So as some of you, or maybe all of you know, we always say that it's really hard to find female engineers, software engineers, or like female senior talent, because it's really competitive to hire them or even like find them. And so that was always a scenario behind why we cannot go really diverse in the engineering organization demographics. But like, is it really so? Like, we started this program, Build at Mercari, and then we received applications from like 174 people. And we even didn't specify this is only for women. We say specifically, this is a program for anybody who identify with underrepresented or minority groups, and it's up to you how you describe it in application. So even like that application making process in the company was a huge learning experience for all of us. Like, we don't want to ask people to check box like, who are you, check, like, what is your nationality, check. Like, we don't want to do that. So how can we make the application even more inclusive to give a space to applicants so that they can explain themselves? So that was a really good learning process for all of us. And then we ended up welcoming 30 trainees. And then out of 30, we hired like 11 interns. And then luckily we found really good talent, and one person became full-time employee last year. So originally our plan was like 5-year plan to bring those members who are trained to the company as an intern officially, and then maybe like we can hire one person in 5 years. But we actually found a good talent who was ready to be onboarded to the company within like few months. So what we learned is like, okay, we were complaining like there are no like female software engineers in the market. It's really hard to find them, but we were not looking at the right place. We were not we were like screening people with biased system, and we actually found that there are people who are there and talented and looking for opportunities. So that was really proving to the companies and leadership that like, if we change the way we do things, we can find talent, and that really opens up opportunities for those who are not getting those like opportunities for a long time. So I think we're seeing many like good opportunities and needs around it.
Thank you so much. So when I understood this correctly, you have a very kind of data-driven approach to DEI, meaning you started off with a DEI survey. Is that correct, or did I understand this correctly?
Yeah, we did run the D&I survey in the beginning stage, but also that survey itself could have been really biased. Maybe like we were not targeting the right group when we did survey. So we are still working on it, like to figure out what is the best inclusive way to collect and meaningful data. So we're not I can't say that, hey, we nailed it, but I think it's a really good learning experience for anybody who are involved in the project, because that's what we're supposed to do, right? Like learning from our own experience.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. Jackie, I'm sure you also have some insights maybe from your experience with enjoi D&I consulting or other endeavors that you've been working with to tackle inequality.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the reasons why I pivoted sort of out of full-time academia and decided to build a company with a feminist diversity lens that would be servicing the Japanese market was really to try and think about how we bring the lessons from, I would say, even the last 30 years in Canada of using intersectional analysis through public policy. And it's about getting down to that really evidence-based approach to the demographics that you're serving, understanding what those demographics are, how do you do an intersectional lens, and then how do you audit the system? I mean, tonight's topic is about systemic solutions. And so we need to look and think about the whole ecosystem. And the ecosystem has these systemic blind spots. It's got blind spots throughout the system in the way that it's designed, to echo the way, you know, how Jason mentioned. If the system was built around this norm of the, you know, the white man in North America, then how does that completely decenter everybody else to the margins of not being the demographic? So how do we recomplicate the picture, use our demographics about our populations or our employees, and then use intersectional analysis and audit the system? So for me, you know, for enjoi diversity and innovation, we're really interested in doing annual auditing that is the ecosystem, the policy ecosystem, that those systemic discriminations and the systemic inequalities are being churned out inadvertently. And initially they were put into the system, like, you know, how many years ago, and there's a legacy effect that they just keep churning and churning and churning. And we have to first start by admitting that we have a problem and that there is inequality, systemic inequality, and that there is no neutral, gender blind, race blind, you know, gay, straight, blind system out there. They've all been built from the perspectives of those who were the norm and who were holding power at the time of the systems being launched and founded. Those foundational moments cannot be effaced overnight, and they certainly won't be changed if we don't admit we have a problem. And then we have to go in and audit the system, audit the ecosystem, the policies on the books, the practices of how we informally reward or penalize people. And the informal culture in Japan, of course, is very strong. And so there's the policies on the books, but then there's also what really happens, which is different from what we say is going on. You know, there's the labor law enshrining, you know, how many hours you're putting in, and there's the FaceTime requirement that your boss is staying until 9 p.m. And so you're staying till 9 p.m. because until they go home, you're not going home. So all of these things, understanding and doing those audits of the policy ecosystem, the informal cultural, you know, areas, and that's where the qualitative interviewing is really important, because we need to figure out, in addition to the policies and the demographics of the company, what is the informal culture, that the qualitative interview and sort of discovery meetings with senior leaders, that's when the informal cultural practices become evident. And as a researcher, you know, I've been interviewing parliamentarians in Japan and Canada for, you know, 15 years. Well, there's what we say with our words, and then there's what it really means, right? And so reading through the double discourse and understanding, well, this is what we technically say we do, and then this is actually kind of how we do it. I've had to be doing that double discourse reading as a political scientist to understand, you know, what is going on when politicians speak or when parliamentarians are being interviewed. There is this sort of things that they can say publicly, and these things that they can't really say openly, but they can give you signals. And so the qualitative data is really key. But I think getting then beyond sort of the intersectional analysis and the auditing of the ecosystem, you know, then we can say, how do we diagnose correctly? Because I guess too often what I'm sort of tired of hearing, not only just in Japan, particularly it's exacerbated in Japan, but also in other countries, why do we misdiagnose that work-life balance is a women's issue? Like, why is that misdiagnosed chronically as a women's issue? It is not a women's issue. It is an issue for anyone who has caregiving responsibilities. And I would argue that in Japan, it is first and foremost a men's issue. Men are stuck at work often until 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., sleeping overnight. If they're presumed to not have to do caregiving, they're not allowed to go home. Or if they start to go home, or they try to go home, or they indicate they might want to go home, they can get written out of career track upward mobility. And the fear of that is motivation enough to say, yeah, I need to opt out of all of the caregiving and I need to just shove that onto my spouse. Because otherwise the men in the company will perceive me to be not loyal and committed. So men's men is a core men's issue, work-life balance. Can we please diagnose that differently now and stop talking about it being a women's issue, and that flex work and all of those are all women's programs? Because they're not, right? But in Japan, they get misdiagnosed in that way. And I think this is where the critical thinking and the critical theories about, okay, how are we misdiagnosing? And then we're solutioning for the wrong things. We're building a flex work program initiative to solve the women's problem. And you still have a two-track system where the women use flex work and the men don't feel they can. So flex work gets tainted and stereotyped as the option for people who aren't career focused. And you still have women who then get passed over promotion because they dared to take flex work, because it wasn't a choice. They just needed to survive with, child rearing. And the men didn't feel they could. So I think diagnosing effectively through intersectional analysis, auditing, admitting that we have to go in and find the blind spots. They're all there. There's blind spots and there's bias and there's corruption in all of the systems that we have. Humans are corruptible. Machiavelli will say it. We are educable and we are corruptible. And we need to find that corruption in our systems, our people systems, and then say, okay, let's be committed to changing it with systemic evidence-based solutions that serve building a better policy ecosystem. And then those ecosystems, those policy ecosystems, are re-incentivizing people with carrots and sticks to be rewarded for gender equal behavior, for queer inclusive behavior, for diversity positive behaviors and inclusive leadership. And I think certainly that's where, we're interested in engaging with companies in that way. Certainly, if I give a quick example of how to diversify a board, I serve on the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and was asked to support, I guess, in a pro bono capacity with the Canadian Chamber to make sure we would have a better process of not just reproducing the usual suspects into our board in our election process. And you get this in electoral politics in every country worldwide. If you don't actually think about the gatekeeping that's going on, inadvertent. Social affinity is a thing. We recruit to people where we have trust. If we mostly only know, businessmen, then we're going to recruit businessmen into our community. If we don't know any professional business women and we don't have trust with those communities of professional women, we won't know to go turn to those communities to recruit them into our chamber. So how we think about our recruitment strategy and then diversifying that is and then making sure we're also going out to build relations of trust with the queer community in Japan, with young professionals in Japan, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs. Those are all gatekeeping issues that happen inadvertently. But creating a new process that checks that. And so what we've done is we've built a rigorous process, a diversification strategy for our board. And we've already got a fairly diverse board, to be honest. As a Canadian chamber, we're very inclusive, but we're still committed to doing better. And so we wanted we wanted more gender balance. We wanted more diversification. We wanted a different diversification across industries, even having more Japanese nationals who are interested in the Japan-Canada relationship. Those are all important diversity points. So you can do attack across 10 different diversity points at the same time, and you build coalitions of solidarity across the organization in really powerful ways.
Thank you for that. I like that you also touched base on basically issues that are not only prevalent in the tech industry, but also in general in society a little bit. Especially when you mentioned caregiving among men, and that, for instance, it seems like caregiving is still a task that is being pushed over to women. I can very well imagine that this isn't only a problem in tech industry, but also in other tech industry. And I hope that the solutions that you mentioned can also swap over to other industries as well. So thank you for your perspective. Jason, you mentioned in the very beginning already your work on DEI a little bit when you started to talk about your work at Etsy. Maybe you can elaborate on that and also talk a little bit about, or tell us a bit about the systemic solutions that you might have when it comes to DEI.
Yeah, absolutely. I just real quick, I just love everything that Jackie just said. This just doubling down this concept of what systemic sexism and racism looks like is you can remove all the sexists and all the racists from the system, and you still end up with sexist and racist outcomes. It's like, so that's what we're fighting here. Just to put a point on it. For me, again, I just going back to understanding anything you do in the diversity and inclusion world, it's going to be a program and not a project, right? If we're going down this road, what I tell my clients is you need to be dedicating the rest of the life of your company to this effort, because that's how long it's going to take. And so that's the first piece there. Again, we're trying to unwind and undo centuries of oppression and normalization of that oppression. And so it's not going to be one, like Jackie said, overnight. The other thing that I think is difficult for folks is you need to be able to hold, and when I say folks, I generally mean men, because the world is laid out for us in very simple terms. And so when we have to hold two ideas at the same time, it's very hard for us. But we need to hold the idea that an ad hoc approach is not going to be sufficient, but we need to start somewhere, right? And so if we think about, like for me, I usually get brought in because founders say, like, I need to diversify, I need to hire more women, right? And what I need to lay out for them is like, this is a systemic problem. Like we've all been saying, systemic problems require systemic solutions, but they also bear systemic benefits for everyone. And so when I'm thinking about like, quote unquote, hiring more women, it is actually not just about the recruiting funnel. It is like, do we have a DEI education program in place to build awareness and education? Like Corona says, like having that common language, that shared language is so important in being able to describe a problem and build conversational capacity and fluency around issues. So like we need a DEI education program, right? Are we rewarding, how are we incentivizing inclusive behaviors in the workplace? Is it written into our career ladders, right? So like we need to find a way to align folks on what is, we need to make what I call the implicit explicit, right? Like these set of behaviors are not okay. These set of behaviors are what we want to encourage, right? What are our checks and balances in the promotion and compensation adjustment process? Are we paying, our candidates don't want to know if they can survive at our companies. They want to know that they can thrive at our companies, right? And so having information and keeping track of, is our underrepresented groups getting promoted at the same rates as their non-underrepresented peers? Are we paying equal pay for equal work? Those kind of things are important. Sponsorship programs, like who gets the benefit of extended privilege, right? There's all this research that shows that underrepresented groups are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Everyone is willing to give advice to underrepresented groups. Not that many people are willing to stick their necks out and put themselves on the hook to help folks either open doors or extend the reputation for them. Getting to the interviewing process of structured interviews and rubrics, right? Are we evaluating people fairly or consistently at the very least? Like there's all sorts of research that says that structured interviews and rubrics result in more balanced and more fair hiring. And finally, what are our company policies around inclusivity? We mentioned parental leave, right? At Etsy, when we made parental leave the same for primary and secondary caregivers, and our CEO took his full parental leave, that was huge for us. And that sort of brought a whole new thinking around, what is the responsibility of childbearing, of caregiving for our employees. So there's all those things that you need to start putting in place. You can't put it all in place at once, but there's probably even more. But like you need to understand that it's going to take multiple efforts on multiple fronts in order to bring about the one change you're looking for, which is diversifying your engineering, hiring more women, right? Essentially.
These are very specific recommendations, I feel like, and initiatives that you mentioned, which I think is great. So I definitely wrote some things down and hope that I can also bring it forward in the future. You mentioned sponsorship, structured interviews and rubrics, also parental leave in an equal way. So I think this is super important, and thanks for sharing that. With all the challenges and the solutions that we have now discussed within your organizations, do you believe that tech is well situated to lead the change towards gender equality, given its agility and flexibility? And or what do you think are your aspirations for how you hope the tech industry will evolve and integrate greater equality? Hope that question makes sense. Let me know if I should rephrase. Jackie, would you maybe like to start?
Sure. I think it's a challenging question because I guess I want to say in theory, yes. The tech sector, technology, if we get to the point where everyone has high-speed internet at home, which is we're not solved, right? I mean, the pandemic has certainly revealed that economic disparity underpins so much of the inequalities and the differential impacts, and then that layers on top of racial injustice and gendered pay gaps and lack of social safety net. So in that sense, if we don't solve the people systems in terms of our public policy and our law, and then how our ecosystems and the company do make sure that paternity leave and maternity leave are paid, are topped up, are encouraged, in fact, maybe also, frankly, just mandatory 6 months. You have a kid, you need to go deal with that. Once you've dealt with it, come back. Because maybe there's a point at which our civic virtue, our civic duty, and our sense to ourselves and our caregiving of our family needs to come first. And it affects our leadership skills when we get back, because we have a lot more emotional intelligence probably if we've dealt with this, a 6-month-old baby. So I think tech alone in a bubble can't solve everything, but it does have a democratizing potential, because if you can learn to access technology, and if you can access working from home, have flexible scheduling as a result of collaborative technologies that allow you to do better balance as mothers, as fathers, as co-mothers, as co-parents, to be able to structure your lives in a way that makes sense for your family. I think that's a huge barrier, but it also means that for those companies that are still doing FaceTime in an office, having the parental leave be enforced for all men and all women. I think it was Marui in Japan, the president was sort of making a statement about we need all fathers to really take their parental leave. And so he would make a point of going up to any new prospective dad and say, congratulations, when are you taking paternity leave? As a way of signaling from the top that no, as president, I'm expecting you to go on leave. And that therefore that's the tone, right? That's the assumption, because we can't just think that investing in sending women to engineering school and making sure that we have women in STEM or is going to solve, again, we're misdiagnosing that if we could just fix the women, get them into STEM, and then we'll be fine as a society and they can all emulate men. That's not the solution, right? I mean, men need to start emulating women's caregiving roles and community roles and social justice activism roles and the caregiving across all of the spaces of society, so that you have a balance on both sides, that the talent pool are gaining those skills in STEM and in caregiving and in community building across all of us, right? So it's not this segregated ghettoing of where we're investing and where we find excellence, and it's in these segregated sections of the population or demographics. But certainly, I think in terms of, in Canada, like 25 years ago, we had scholarships, federal level scholarships for women who wanted to do engineering. So those are great initiatives to try and change the pipeline. We also need scholarships for men who want to become daycare workers. We need to work on both sides of the equation, right? But I do think that if we can help build the pipelines around STEM and help build the pipelines around men in caregiving, absolutely. In Quebec, we've seen that with the universal daycare system and really, really big investments of men into the public universal daycare system as daycare workers, because they're union jobs and they're really good jobs, better jobs sometimes than other professions that aren't union. We've seen a whole influx of men in caregiving in the universal public daycare in Quebec, and that's a really interesting trend. Here in Tokyo, we have a Code Chrysalis, which is building the pipeline, trying to train coders and having a scholarship and attracting women to the boot camp, having a scholarship for single mothers who should be learning how to code and who could maybe be interested in that kind of a profession and a tech savvy. So I think it's really how we combine the people systems with the technological opportunities to really build forward and move the dial for equality on all sides of the equation.
Thank you. So it sounds like there is definitely hope. Jason, what do you think? So do you think tech is well situated to lead the change towards gender equality? And what is your hope, how the tech industry will evolve?
Yeah, again, same thing. In theory, yes, right? I mean, the cliche about every tech company is like, come work with us and we'll change the world. And this would be some epic world changing that would happen. So I think aspirationally, yes. I think there are a couple advantages in the tech industry. One is the employees skew younger in tech, right? And generally, I'm really optimistic about the younger generation. For them, like these things matter much more. They've been brought up in a world where they understand a lot more deeply the systemic issues at play, and so like the more I hang out with younger folks, the more optimistic I get. I think the other thing that I see is we're in a phase of tech now, which I think requires it. One, we've got sort of this halo effect of tech really wearing off big time, right? So at some point, we're going to need to make a decision about what the future of our industry looks like and how we want to be perceived going forward. And again, like for millennials and Gen Zers, like ethics and morals and justice matters. So if we want to continue to be relevant to our future sort of labor force, then we need to adapt to those things. So that's one part. The second part, at least in this, and I'll speak for the States here, like cryptocurrencies aside, I just don't think you can build a successful business today in this environment catering just to white men. There's a reason why, Peloton signed a deal with Beyonce. There's a reason why almost every TV commercial out there in the US has a multi-ethnic couple in it. Like we are understanding that, not just we're understanding how all these things come together. In order for us to reach the success that the VCs want and the investors want, we need to create organizations that have fewer blind spots. And then the last hurdle that we will have to overcome eventually is that VC Wall Street crowd, which I think is going to be the toughest nut to crack in terms of folks who are still trenched in this concept of a meritocracy and this concept that they've earned all the dollars that they burn. So that's the last piece. But I think, overall, I think I'm optimistic.
That sounds great. By the way, I'm writing down some quotes from you because I think they're actually really inspirational. It's a bit out of context, but at some point you said you can't just cater white men, and I just wrote that down. And there were some other things, but we can talk about that offline. I thought that's actually really, really interesting. Thanks for your hope and also for your perspective. Sarah, what about you? Could you tell us a bit about your aspirations, hopes, and whether we're ready for tech?
Yeah, I think I'm really sort of excited to see so many sort of, boards and advisory councils and sort of governing bodies really starting to pay attention to the ethical protocols needed in the design of AI machine learning, right? So I'm hopeful, right, when we're seeing really cool open sourced protocols and techniques and strategies for developers and technologists generally to sort of be able to dabble with and at least be more considerate of. So I think things are brewing. So in that way, I'm hopeful. And I definitely think in theory, yes, tech can do some really good damage, right? We know that tech loves to work on solving big, complex, complicated problems. And so if the field of tech and innovation can start to see sort of social justice related conversations in the same way as they see other sort of big meaty problems or even menial things for random apps, then we'd be in good shape. We love to use the agile methodology. For folks who don't know, agile is an approach commonly used in software development. And we love to apply agile to how we actually implement DEI efforts. Right, we know that these efforts often fail at the implementation stage, and so agile is like one way that we can apply some structure and rigor to actually getting things done, and actually operationalizing this work and over the long haul. And we think it's a really good way of actually using sort of a shared language and process, right, to sort of build bridges between sometimes technologists and non-technologists. So, if tech can start to view justice related issues on the same terms as all the other problems that they seek to tackle, then I think it is well positioned to do some good damage. We just need more protocols, more embedding around ethics for sure.
Okay, so in general, like in a very broad way, what I'm hearing also is that tech is in general well positioned, but tech is not the only solution. So there's definitely more at stake that needs to be done. Hirona, what do you think about the situation of tech being able to move forward when it comes to gender equality and your hopes and aspirations towards that?
Yeah, I'm really optimistic, and I believe that the tech industry can really pave the way toward gender equality. So from my understanding, I think the DNI is sometimes like described in the context of like competition, like which company is like driving DNI or DEI work more or more effectively, but it should be more about like collaboration. Like for example, like last year, we developed a relationship with Google, Facebook, Twitter to form this organization called Connected Women Tokyo, which is a platform where we empower women in each other's company and to build relationship with each other, use networking opportunities, and really help each other grow. So it's more about like alliance rather than competition. And I think that mindset really shifted our perspective, instead of like seeing them as a competitor, but like we are here to support each other. And a few days ago, like a person working at the VC contacted us asking like, what can we do together to tackle gender inequality in a VC or like tech space? And she was saying like, there are many like VCs or new startups that are interested in working on DNI, but they just don't know how can we work together. So I think there are many collaboration opportunities out there. Maybe we're just like not aware of these opportunities yet. With that said, I think it is not the issue within a tech industry. Like, for example, like what about people working in our fancy cafeteria or like our partner companies or our like, so for example, like Mercari has a group company for that provides financial services, and many of our clients or partners are like from banks or other financial institutions or from the government. And can we actually building an inclusive space for them as well? Like even if we completely change the way we work from DNI perspective, what about our partners? If we are not on the same page about DNI expectations, then I don't think we are advancing collectively. So there should be lots and lots more collaboration like among companies in the tech industry, but also across industries as well. But if that is possible, then I think we can surely advance DNI altogether.
Thank you. So that sounds definitely hopeful. Thank you all for this. So we're actually almost at the end of the panel discussion. We're a bit over time, but I think it was worth it just to hear your perspectives. That being said, there's still some questions. We don't have time, unfortunately, for all of them, but I will pick about maybe 1, 2, or 3 tops, depending on how much time we then have left for you to answer. These will be at least one question from the registration form that we got and one question at least from the chat that we have coming in during the panel discussion that I would like to direct towards you. Starting with the first question, this is a question that came in from the registration form from someone who is attending today, hopefully watching the live stream. And the question is, in a Harvard Business Review article in 2013 titled, "Why do so many incompetent men become leaders?" It says that this is because it's a result of a pathological system that rewards men for their incompetence while punishing women for their competence. It's a bit of a longer question. And the question would be, thinking of it is, do you agree? And if so, why hasn't changed anything since then? It was 2013. Is it because to unconscious bias still? And what can we all do to change it? it's a bit of a longer question, but I thought it might be worth it. I'm just opening up to you, so there's no structure, so just jump in and I'll try to moderate.
True. Absolutely true. I mean, I think there's a couple things that are interesting here. One is, again, going back to the systemic issues, the power of normalization is so strong. And so when you have all these successful companies, which are led by men, in our brains and pattern matches to, oh, it must be that we need a man at the helm in order to have a successful company. So there's that bit of it. There's another bit of it, which is just the fragility of men in general. I think Jackie got into all sorts of detailed examples of problems. And what prevents us from having discussions about those problems is people get caught up in just the description, the accurate description of the state of the world when it doesn't match their mental model. And so to me, that's where I have most of my difficult conversations. It's not that I can't even get to the substance of the argument or of the data. It is just I am describing the landscape as I see it, and the fragility that's baked into into that privileged world prevents us from getting any further. Is what I found.
If I can maybe offer a comment from the research field, certainly I've been looking at women in politics for 25 years. And we're constantly looking at, and for me, it was a focus on how to diversify parliaments and politics. And so the electoral processes and how recruitment happens. And, there's these worldwide trends of, political parties constantly saying, we can't find any qualified women. We don't know where the qualified women are. There aren't enough qualified women to run for office. That's why we don't have women in office. That's why our parliament is 90% men. And the reality is, of course, the demographics when you see in Canada or other countries, but particularly if I look at Canada, women have been graduating majority of med school, law school for like a long time. Women are in engineering and in computer science. We do have these strong performance of women in all of these different disciplines. And so it's not that there's a lack of qualified women. We do have these affinity groups in terms of how we recruit within our affinity groups, right? So within politics, within tech, within science communities, within whatever soccer community, it doesn't matter which one, we hang out and we have these affinities that lead to disproportionate groupthink about what constitutes excellence. And people like me, if I'm excellent and I think I'm excellent, then I'll recruit people like me. And well, if I was at the University of Tokyo as a professor, then that's elite. And therefore I should look for other people who are, and you get this, prophecy of, people who went to University of Tokyo think that is the cream of the cream, or Ivy League in the United States, or you're recruiting the same people. So in the gender and politics sphere, we see that actually when you get in a legal quota that breaks up the monopolies of groupthink and power, the legal quota, the mechanism that is strongly enforced, means that the political party recruitment team has no choice but go do their homework and go recruit beyond the usual suspects that they can just bring in really easily with low amounts of work. And they have to actually do their due diligence and go out and diversify and make sure they're recruiting from all different types of groups. And it forces them to diversify the core talent pool that comes in. And that raises the overall caliber of actually who enters the system and who actually wins in the systems. So we do see a strong correlation in the gender and politics research community on, what we call the crisis of the mediocre man, who doesn't have a spot to run in office anymore once you have a strong legal quota that's enforced, because all of the men become more excellent to get in. And all of the women, of course, have to be excellent just to even get there. As the other piece of research we always see is the women are more qualified and have to be super women just to be even considered. So it's an interesting finding across the international research side of things.
Thanks to both of you for answering the question. And I hope the person who asked the question is in the audience too and was happy with the question, with the answer. We have maybe time for one or two more questions. So one other question, this is also from the registration form, is asking what reminders or tips would you share to in-house D&I professionals that are juggling recruitment, culture building, and employee engagement objectives in a growing tech startup? Hirona, you said, I think that you worked in a startup before. I think your company grew. It is now not a startup any longer, I think, but nevertheless, maybe you have an answer to that. Otherwise, happy to open the question to all others as well.
Yeah, maybe I can go ahead. So I think it's really common that D&I person or D&I in charge person is juggling all kinds of work in HR or in a startup, doing like hiring, like training and policy making and everything else. And then this person burns out, and I was almost there. So I hear you if you're out there. But that's not a really sustainable way to advance D&I, because ideally, like somebody who has a D&I background or like D&I as their as their professional domain, like this person should serve as a advisor or like consultant within the company, not like you doing everything for other teams. And for example, in even my company, like yes, we do have a hiring team, like talent acquisition team, but for a long time it was really hard for us to come to an agreement where we can build this hiring strategy together, because I was kind of asked to do some part of hiring, and then, but in my deep down in my heart, I was thinking, but hiring team should do all of these. And then like we were just like pushing this like diversity hiring tasks to each other's like plate, and it doesn't really go anywhere. But once you build a relationship with teams of like each domain, like hiring or policy making or like a corporate planning, hi puppy, then you really like get to build a relationship, and then also clarify what is expectation from each other, so we hold each other accountable for our own professional domain. So like really like investing in relationship building and then bringing them as an ally to D&I initiatives, instead of like asking them to do everything that is like on your plate right now, or like vice versa. So I think that partnership building takes time, but I think it's rewarding at the end of the day.
And I would add, you know, if you're in this role and you're not currently being compensated for it, that's a conversation that you need to figure out how to have, because one of the quickest way to exacerbate existing inequity is to be doing this work in an unpaid, voluntary capacity. So, but I get the constraints of startups and, you know, not wanting to have another headcount. That's real. So track your hours, build the case for how much of this, like this work like requires for this organization, like show your work, right? And track it, and try to build out some sort of decentralized committee that you can scale across the organization so that you can delegate different parts of the work that you're doing. And also like the HR people related side of DEI work is just like 1/8 of where this work needs to focus, right? You need to be spanning to, you know, your products, everything, right? It's a deeply holistic sort of practice. So track your work, get some support, and build the case to be compensated for the work.
Thank you. That's super specific and very action oriented. Really like that. We have 1 minute left. I'd love to just ask one last question from the chat from someone who asked a question during the panel discussion, which I think is really topical. One question came in asking, what can we do with the impact of gender inequality caused by the effects of the pandemic to make females interested or stronger in tech? So I think that's really topical in times of the pandemic. We have about 1 or 2 minutes left. So anyone having a great solution for that or so?
I think Jackie can maybe add on to this, but as she was explaining, this is not only a women's issue, it's about an issue of people who have limited time for working, or like who have like the caring responsibility. So instead of like categorizing this as a like specific gender issue, it's about the people who have a specific limitations or regulations, and then like, changing that will benefit other groups of people as well. So maybe like shifting the perspective might be a good introduction. What others think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, we know from the statistics, certainly that, marginalized women, individuals who are in precarious work contracts are very hard hit. That often intersects with gender and a women's position in Japan in particular, but also in the United States and Canada, if you look at the trends. So we see those impacts. We also see that with everybody working at home, for those who aren't frontline, emergency worker related or care work, healthcare worker related, who are disproportionately impacted to risk at work. But for those who have the privilege to work from home, I think it's interesting to think about how this can maybe morph things for families to make visible the extent and the amount of caregiving that actually is required, and that social reproduction is just a huge amount of work. And if you're living underfoot with now having to homeschool and having to work from home and having children underfoot and pets and elderly living with you, all of that caregiving now, the running of the household is a full-time job, caregiving and child rearing and elder care is full-time jobs, and paid work is a full-time job. Like, there's not enough hours in the day. So making visible, and then thinking about how do we equitably redistribute the work and power share more equitably within our families, I think is the biggest challenge we have to solve. And hopefully making that visible and starting those conversations can be one benefit out of what has been the global impact of this pandemic, if we can pay it forward by learning to share power together better in the family.
Yeah, I'll also say I have friends that I talk with all the time who are fathers who work all the time. And, before pandemic, they're like, I wish I could spend more time with my family. Well, now's your time. Now is your time.
Thank you for that. So yeah, thank you so much. So I think we're already a little bit over time, but again, I think it's worth it, especially to answer some questions from the audience. Before I'm handing over to our MCs, last question to our panelists. Do you have any last words to our audience when it comes to tackling gender inequality in the tech industry? Maybe very short, like in a minute or so. What would you like to tell our audience in that regard? Jackie, would you like to start?
I'm going to just say, I'm encouraging men in Japan of all different nationalities and walks of life and sexual orientations. I don't really care. I'm encouraging all men to just start taking seriously their self-care and their right to, have work-life balance, and to start feeling that they can push back on all of the constraints that are pushed onto them under the guise of masculinity and corporate warrior and all of that. I mean, I think we just need men to really also just care about their personal freedoms. And I think if they can give that, it can generate a better spill-off effect for better gender equality in the workplace for everyone, including for women. But we need men to stand up and start taking care of themselves more seriously too, I think, as a start.
I think I agree, definitely. Sarah, your last words?
Yeah, I think at a high level, tech is not going to save us, right? Another app is not going to save us. We cannot resolve inequities with zeros and ones. And a tiny sliver of the population should not be able to design and build technology that impacts so many of our lives. And you do not need to be a technologist to be part of the solution, right? Every one of us has a role in this, right? If you are an artist, a creator, a storyteller, a designer, an innovator, a maintainer, a sustainer, whoever, whatever sort of skill sets you have, we need all hands on deck for this, because our brains are the largest piece of technology that we have, and we all need to be part of shaping this collective future.
Thank you. Jason, what about you? Your last words to the audience.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to echo what Jackie said. One of the great injustices that happens in the DEI space is that the education of the majority is being placed on the minority, that burden. And we need to understand that fixing sexism in a workplace is not just a woman's job, right? It's not a woman's problem to fix. And the metaphor I have is like, say you are in your home and someone comes in and wrecks your home, right? And then on the way out says, hey, it's a mess in here, you should clean it up. Like, that's not okay. And so as men, if we are not actively supporting our women colleagues, like if we're not actively helping out in this problem and pitching in, we are just part of the problem.
Milan, you're muted.
I hope that's the last time that it happened. Thanks again. Hirona, last but not least, love to hear your thoughts and last words as well.
I would like to thank everyone who are here today, because you're here because you care, and I really appreciate it. And I like to emphasize this a lot and say it out loud, that if you're the one who is advocating D&I in your organization or community, please give yourself a big round of applause, because you're doing great. Thank you so much. And even the progress seems small, like that's a huge step in a long run. So please don't forget that. And if you're in a leadership position or like supervisory position, and someone directly under your someone who is under your report line is working on D&I advocacy or promotion, please show your acknowledgement and show your appreciation and give acknowledgement to this person, because the emotional and physical or like spiritual well-being of this D&I promoter or advocate is it means so much to your organization and also to this person as well. So please give them acknowledgement and say thank you, and just tell them that you're here to support their journey as well. And yeah, I think that's my last word.
Thank you so much. I can only echo what all of you said. I think especially Hirona, yes, thank you also to the audience who are live streaming, because you're here, you care, and that's great. Thank you so much, Sarah, Jackie, Jason, Hirona, for attending this panel discussion. It has been incredibly insightful. Sorry for forgetting to unmute myself about 3 to 4 times this time. I hope next time when I'm moderating, I'm not doing the same mistake. It's been a pleasure to moderate the session, and I hope the audience found it at least as exciting as I and the organizing team found it. And yeah, thank you so much again. And I will hand over to our MCs to conclude this event. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, panel and our moderator, Milan, for such a riveting and stimulating discussion. And I know many audience members will share my sentiment when I say this was truly an important dialogue that we just witnessed for both gender equality in tech and also way beyond that. And so on that note, as we consider the steps we must take towards systemic change and continue to foster intersectional collaboration, I'm sure a lot of you are already wondering how you can get more engaged in the effort to build sustainable diversity and inclusion. I'd like to pass over the mic to Jackie at this moment, who has some exciting news to share about some initiatives and involvement opportunities. Jackie, would you like to take the stage?
Sure, thank you very much. And then are you able to share the next screen? Great. So I'll just mention really briefly, enjoi diversity and innovation is really keen, I think, to work with other humans, right? Other individuals of diverse backgrounds. And one of the things that we've launched is an enjoi thought partner network, which was really the idea was to make visible all of the individuals that I was coming across in Japan of all different nationalities who were diversity positive, who were totally on board with supporting women's leadership and women's thought leadership and women in power. And I wanted to make that visible to leaders in Japan. And then I've expanded and added people across APAC. I've added people from Canada, the United States, Europe, and I realized there's just a momentum building, and it's really nice to have a community of people who are committed to these issues and to make that visible, that we take this normal. This is normal. This is our normal, right? This is diversity positive, queer positive, pro-women's leadership. And so I'm always looking to meet new individuals who are doing exciting things and who in their industries, in their fields, and in their professional expertise and in their life are bringing this forward into the world. We have an initiative called Diversity Rocks Innovation. It's a new live stream that's going to be starting this coming Tuesday. And I will be featuring a different thought partner from the Thought Partner Network. And we're going to just real-time thought partner out loud together to show that, throw away your business card. I don't care what your meishi says. I don't care if you're older than me, younger than me, senpai, kohai, whatever. Can we get rid of the hierarchy and just say, can we show up as individuals in our radical individuality and say, can we learn from each other and from all the different diversities we bring forward? So please, if you're interested in that, role modeling this kind of idea of thought partnering out loud, join us for Diversity Rocks Innovation every Tuesday at noon JST, which is also, I think it's 7 p.m. in Vancouver. I should have looked that up. But anyhow, for those who are trying to tune in from West Coast North America, please do as well, because it should work for your time zone. So, and if you're looking for obviously consulting support or guidance on this, Enjoy D&I, we have a great team. We focus on accessibility, disability, intersectionality across all facets, and we'd love to work with you. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I'd like to hand to back to maybe Rachel to guide to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And next, we also have Anya from Women Who Code Tokyo, who would also like to share some exciting upcoming events. Anya, would you be able to take the stage at this time?
Yes, can you pass to the next slide, please? Thank you. So hi, everyone. So for everyone who'd like to join our Women Who Code community, I encourage you to check this QR code that I posted. It will send you to invite for our Slack community, where you can meet other women in tech and also join our dedicated channels for people learning different technologies. You can also find all the latest news about our events there as well. So we have 3 upcoming events in the nearest months. We are hosting study groups every month or every 2 weeks. So please join us on January 30 for our Ruby group, and then on February for our online study session. And also on February 7, we will host an event in Japanese with tech talks from women working in tech and talking about their experience. So I hope you'll be able to join as well. Thank you, and I'm passing back to Rachel.
Thank you, Anya. And if you all enjoyed today's discussion and want to connect with all of our organizations, please follow our social accounts to stay updated on the latest news and for more exciting events just like this one. So I'm just going to pause for a moment if anybody wants to screen cap this page. And last but not least, just one final housekeeping item. It's just a quick survey we would like all audience members to please fill out so we can get your thoughts on today, what you thought of today, and how we can improve the event for future events. And thank you so much. Now I'll pass over to Jan for the final words.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So this marks the conclusion of Solutioning Forward, Systemic Change for Gender Equality in the Tech Industry. And I would like to thank again our co-host and the organizing team, Yuki, Shirley, Anya, who have been working hard behind the scenes to help our event to run smoothly and make sure that there are no technical bugs. And our wonderful moderator, Milan, thank you so much, and Rachel, our MC, and of course our wonderful panel members providing an integral insight. And all of you who took time to come together and join us today, we really appreciate. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all at our next event. Have a great weekend.